Hello Thomas fans and welcome once again. First off, I am so sorry that you had to wait so long for this video to be made. It's so good to know that there are people hyped for my videos, whatever they may be, so thank you for all the comments and for being so patient. Well, most of you anyway. So, we're now in the 21st century and on to season 6. I do have particular memories of coming home after preschool to watch some of these episodes on CITV, but even then I could tell that these stories weren't quite the same as what we'd previously seen. But I do still like these, and today I will be talking about all 26 episodes of this series and ranking them from worst to best. As ever, this video is my opinion and my opinion only, so if your list is different to mine, good for you. So, let's start the list. Number 26, James and the Red Balloon. Like most of the previous series, there aren't really any episodes in this series that I consider bad. There are just some that aren't that exciting. James and the Red Balloon is quite a pleasant episode where we get some nice shots of the hot air balloon flying over Sodor. There's an interesting debate where the edges are worried that passengers will stop riding in their trains because of the balloon. That's quite interesting. But other than that, there's not a huge amount to say about this one. Number 25. Thomas, Percy and the Squeak. Another simple episode, this one. I don't really like how Thomas treats Percy in this episode, but it's not the worst we get of Thomas this series. A really funny scene is where Alicia Botti discovers the mouse in the coaches. She screams and all the windows break. A classic moment. I do like the strange turnaround where Alicia chooses to ride in Percy instead of Thomas because he's dirty, and I do sometimes wonder whether Alicia the mouse is still at Tidmouth Sheds. Although with 3 female engines at Tidmouth Sheds, she probably wouldn't be very welcome there. Either way, an okay episode this one. Number 24, Jack Frost. Another episode I didn't know of until much later in my childhood. This one uses another storyline that's been used in pretty much every kids show ever. The main character talks about scary creature, one character doesn't believe in it, when suddenly the scary creature appears. But don't worry, it's just the main character made to look like the scary creature. These kinds of stories were the first signs that Thomas was perhaps losing its uniqueness. But Jack Frost still does this storyline in a fairly tasteful way, so that's why it's only third to last. Number 23, Faulty Whistles. So Duncan, starts showing off his loud whistle to the edges after Peter Sam, loses his whistle. Sorry, it's just too hard to ignore the fact that these two episodes are the same in virtually every way. I do quite like that they resolved the problem by having the organ playing. That's a bit more creative than the second version. Once again, a simple episode that's too much like another simple episode. Number 22. Elizabeth the Vintage Lorry. Elizabeth is a good character. There's nothing negative I can say about her. Her first episode is only average and at times a bit slow in pace. It's funny to think that the Fat Controller once owned Elizabeth and also wasn't a very good driver. That's a story that I think should be redone in CGI if Elizabeth ever returns to the series. But that said, this episode is a good way to introduce Elizabeth and nothing more. Number 21. It's Only Snow. Sorry Thomas, but do you really expect us to believe you can move snow without a snowplow? As always, the episodes with snow look wonderful. The plot is okay, I just don't like how half the story is reminding us that Thomas hates his snowplow when that doesn't really tie into the story that much. The crash looks spectacular and I think that's the big winner in this episode, but other than that, it's only average. Number 20. Harvey to the Rescue. Pretty much the same as Elizabeth the Vintage Lorry. This one is a good way to develop Harvey's character. The advice that the Fat Controller gives Harvey could appeal to everyone, and I'm glad they included that. Percy's crash looks cool, and it's good that in the end everyone respects Harvey after he helps Percy. The moral of the story is definitely the best part of this one. Number 19. Toby Had a Little Lamb. In this one, you can't help but feel a lot of concern for the sheep and hope that Toby saves them from the snow, which once again looks brilliant. I can definitely understand Mickey Flanagan's theory that you're in for a blinder when Toby's in an episode, and I think you are with Toby Had a Little Lamb. It's gripping and intense, but gives you a warm feeling as well. Number 18. Percy and the Haunted Mine. A lot of people complain when characters who should be brave are scared in a particular episode, but for me it makes sense to have Percy as a timid character because that whole near miss with Gordon in Percy Runs Away would definitely scare the life out of someone and affect them for years to come. Percy and the Haunted Mine I find is okay. The mine does look quite dark and I could certainly see why Percy would call it haunted, but other than that, I can't think of too much else to say. Number 17. Buffer Bother. If there's any problem I have with the twin characters in Thomas, it's that they very rarely have any time to themselves. Fortunately, this problem is solved in Buffer Buffer. I won't lie though, Bill does become very annoying after a while, and that is pretty much the story in a nutshell. Bill's crash is pretty amusing, and who doesn't find this line funny?
Here, bust my buffers, cried Bill. I think you have, said.
But if it weren't for these two scenes, as well as the concept of separating Bill and Ben, this episode would be much lower. Number 16. A bad day for Harold the helicopter. At some point we all wanted to see Harold have an accident, and I really think it worked in this episode. The old rivalry between Percy and Harold is once again good to see, and we finally see the two of them help each other. The moral of the story is good, Harold's crash is quite dramatic, a very good episode. Number 15. No sleep for Cranky. It really was great to see the chance that someday Cranky might actually be a good crane, after Salty tells Bill and Ben so many stories which annoy Cranky. The comments that Cranky make are really funny, and when he's relieved that the engines can go, the viewers can't help but wonder, is this the moment that Cranky is nice to everyone? But realistically, that would never happen. Well, until Carly arrived and spoiled all that. But either way, a really appropriate episode that has everything you'd expect from a story about Cranky. Number 14. Scaredy Engines. The storyline in Scaredy Engines has been used so many times, but this episode is better because of how scary they make the smelters yard. It is very reminiscent of the brilliant sets we were given in Series 5, and once again, the visuals sent shivers down my spine. Thomas is a bit of an arsehole to Percy, but the way in which they made up makes for a very nice ending. Number 13. Duncan. Another classic Duncan episode. The incline railway is one of my favourite parts of Solo because of all the cool incidents they've had. This story features another one of these. Duncan is once again being boastful to the other narrow gauge engines, and he once again gets his just desserts, this time in very amusing fashion. The characters are at their best, and the crash is both dramatic and funny. Number 12. The Fogman. More human characters, please, Mattel. That's all I asked for. Cyril the Fogman is a very interesting character and I think would have had some potential. I love the storyline in this episode with the foghorn, and I love Thomas's crash. The moral of the story is interesting as well, and that is, sometimes the most efficient way of doing things isn't always the safest. Number 11. A Friend in Need. After the first episode to feature the pack, A Friend in Need is a great way to conclude Jack's introduction to the pack. The scene of the bridge collapsing is incredibly dramatic, especially for a Season 6 episode, and it must have been a nightmare to film. We do feel pleased that Jack is allowed to stay, and it makes the fact that the spin-off series was cancelled all the more disappointing. Number 10. Salty's Secret. Has there been a CGI episode with Salty as the main character? If not, I'm surprised. We've seen so many episodes where Salty is a secondary character and is in a good mood as usual. But Salty's Secret is good because we see a different side to the character. His love for working by the docks is revealed, and it's quite upsetting to see him unhappily work at the quarry instead. And you do feel happy when he finally gets his wish. Number 9. Middle Engine. For years this was my favourite Season 6 episode, but now that people have said why they dislike this one, I get it now. Yes, it wasn't Percy's fault that he ended up on the loading ramp, but there are so many moments that are impossible not to laugh at. It was a great way to properly introduce Ari and Bert by having them make the steam engines middle engines, and of course James is the one who gets humiliated at the end. Classic Thomas. Number 8. Jack Jumps In. Again, it is such a shame that the spin-off series was cancelled. Just like they did with the narrow gauge engines, the pack are introduced brilliantly. Despite there being so many characters, we know a little bit about each one of them by the end of the episode, and the fact that this is a 5-minute episode makes it even more impressive. We become hopeful that Jack is able to make up for his mistake in the next episode, but I find Jack Jumps In better than the second episode because of how well developed these new characters are. Number 7. Twin Trouble. I know Buffer Bobber is very similar to this one in places. I mean, you do know there is more than one way to have an accident, right? But I like this one more because it's Dold and Douglas. I know we've seen these two fall out in 3 different episodes, but this one is good because of how they both treat each other. It's obvious that the Scottish twins have some kind of anger management problem, and to see them going against each other is quite interesting to watch. And when they apologise to each other, you feel relieved that the feud has ended because, as we've seen before, the twins need each other and care for each other hugely. Number 6. Percy's Chocolate Crunch. I think everyone remembers the episode where Percy gets covered in the chocolate. This story focuses on one thing and one thing only, and that is to make us laugh, and they managed that brilliantly. There really is no story to this one, but it's still memorable in every way. It is good to know that even in the 21st century, the writers could still come up with the occasional gem. Number 5. Thomas the Jet Engine. Just like the last one, it's impossible to forget Thomas the Jet Engine. While the concept is unrealistic, I will admit, this episode is a good reminder that we can see the fun side of everything, even on railways. I love the humorous moments with Bertie and Gordon. I love the incredibly fast pace of the runaway scene, and overall, this episode would definitely challenge some of its predecessors. Number 4. Rusty Saves the Day. At times, a very depressing episode, this one. What I like the most about it is how it portrays the harsh realities of railways nowadays. There isn't as much space for railway lines as what there once was, and we really want Rusty to stop the line being closed. Elizabeth really works in this story, and I like how in the end she is still stubborn even after she has helped the engines. It's a very mature story that you wouldn't expect from modern Thomas. Number 3. The world's strongest engine. He's back and he's as bad as ever. Diesel is once again one of the best parts of this episode. It's really funny to see him try and fail to become the world's strongest engine. The trucks are amusing to listen to as well, and the crash is both hilarious and dramatic. And of course, as a Henry fan, it's good to see him save the day in the end. Even though Diesel was only in one Railway Series book, I'm glad the writers made the very brave decision to bring him back because it's given us some fantastic episodes, and the world's strongest engine is definitely one of them. Number 2. Edward the Very Useful Engine. This one has always stuck out for me because, who wouldn't be impressed by the fact that Edward could push 2 trains up a hill when Gordon can't even push one of them? I know it's not very realistic, but it's a great way to leave Gordon with egg on his face again. It's also a very fitting way to prove the big engine's wrong about Edward. I always remember this one when I think of great Series 6 episodes. At number 1, Gordon Takes a Tumble. This is why we love Gordon the Big Engine. Well, us older, more nostalgic fans. The story to Gordon Takes a Tumble really suits his character. To see him take trucks for the first time in a long time and learn a valuable lesson in doing so feels so appropriate. Now, I don't know about the other parts of this episode, but I think every Thomas fan out there, big or small, knows or remembers the big crash that Gordon has. It is that spectacular. And in case you were wondering, 31 seconds the crash takes place for, but every time Gordon hits something, it looks really cool. So why can we not get an episode about Gordon in the current series so the kids don't hate him for being an asshole like he is all the time? Sorry, I completely lost my cool there. Anyway, Gordon Takes a Tumble is definitely one of Gordon's finest episodes, and by a considerable margin, the best of Series 6. So, what's my opinion on Series 6? Well, it's good that the 21st century didn't impact Thomas and Friends too much, as we were given some really fun and interesting episodes. They weren't quite the same as what we've been given prior to this, as I said before, but they still deserve a place in the classic era of Thomas and Friends. At the moment, I rank it 6th on the all-time list, but when I watch all the season 20 episodes for the ranking video on that series, we'll have to see if that changes. So, what do you guys think? Is your list different to mine? And what's your opinion on Series 6? Let me know down in the comments. As always, thanks for watching, if indeed you still are. Well, I imagine you still are. You've been asking for it for the past 3 months.